Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the open forum panel discussion. My name is Ben Ying. I'm one of the moderator in this session. We are honored to host two distinguished panelists, Marty Alvarado and Dr. Erick Montenegro, who brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise in the fields of education, workforce development, and equity-centered policies. First, let me introduce Marty Alvarado. As the Vice President of Postsecondary Education and Training at Jobs for the Future, Marty has been instrumental in shaping strategic initiatives that significantly impact education and workforce landscapes. Her impressive career includes roles such as the Executive Vice Chancellor for the California Community Colleges and Director of Workforce Development at Long Beach City College. With a deep commitment to developing inclusive strategies, Marty has dedicated her career to addressing systematic barriers and empowering individuals from diverse backgrounds. Her work in driving innovation and leading transformative initiatives in education and workforce training model has been pivotal in fostering system change. Marty holds a bachelor's degree in philosophy from Whittier College and a master's degree in philosophy and cultural analysis from the University of Amsterdam. Our second panelist is Dr. Erick Montenegro, the Associate Director of the Pell Institute and Director of Evaluation and Impact at the Council for Opportunity in Education. As a thought leader in equity impact center assessment and culturally responsive evaluation, Erick has made significant contribution to the field. His dedication to improving college and career opportunities for underrepresented students is evident in his research, which provides policy recommendation and emphasizes practical outcomes. Dr. Montenegro, a three-time alumnus of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, has shared his insights through numerous presentations, keynotes, and workshops. The panelists will engage in a thought-provoking discussion on several critical topics: trend in jobs, training, and the link between higher education and workplace. We will explore how universities and industry can collaborate to align education with job market demands and the integration of digital literacy and technical skills in higher education's curricula. Current and future trends in job market. Our focus will shift the impact of automation and AI on the workforce, the challenges and opportunity of the gig economy, sustainability, focused careers, remote work, and ensuring job security and work-life balance for graduates. Finally, the evolving role of higher education in job preparedness. Finally, we will discuss balancing the impacting of soft skills with technical proficiency in higher education and strategy for online education platform to provide accessible and sustainable education. We're excited to hear from our panelists and dive into this vital discussion. Please join me in warmly welcome Marty Alvarado and Dr. Erick Montenegro to the 11th Annual SLO Symposium.
All right, excellent.
With that, Amanda will ask the first question.
Yes, what a great privilege I get to kick us off with the first question. All right. When it comes to trends in jobs, training, and the link between higher education and the workplace, how can universities and industries collaborate effectively to ensure that the blend of traditional and practical training, including micro-credentials, truly aligns with the evolving demands of the job market?
I'm not sure who you'd like to go first.
Whoever wants to go first. It's you now.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that we started with an easy question, right? Simple to answer. But I think it depends, right? It's not the best answer, not the most practical one, but it really does depend. You have to take your context into account, right? The approaches that Ivy Leagues use are not the same ones that a teaching institution will use, a community college will use, right? I think it's very attractive to immediately go and try to forge partnerships with Fortune 500 companies, but that shouldn't be the only avenue. And it's not really the most realistic one for a lot of institutions and programs, right? So I think we first have to look at our context, our communities, right? What are the available industries? Where are some of our graduates likely to go? What are the most in-depth jobs, in-demand jobs for students? And then go from there. Then hopefully you start local community, go nationally and beyond. But one way that this can be done is first by institutions really trying to enhance their current initiatives and really evaluating the effectiveness of those initiatives, right? If there isn't one already, I think institutions, it's a good practice for them to assemble a board that's tasked with tackling this very issue. So comprised of staff members, faculty, employers, students, right? So we can work together and really explore what this means and how can we improve career services and outcomes for students. And this can also be very practical in looking at career fairs, job expos, and connection to the classroom. But, and this might be an aside, but we also need to ensure we're not only having career fairs and career development opportunities for STEM majors or business majors, right? But really enhancing those opportunities across the campus and creating inroads for students to receive the exposure that's needed, the feedback that they really need, and the opportunities that will get them directly face-to-face with industry people, right? For example, I was recently exposed to micro internships, which I didn't know were a thing until recently, right? So instead of it being semester long, they're more project-based. And these create opportunities for then students to get involved through virtual experiences, right? You don't have to commute, you don't have to be displaced. And this is a huge opportunity for students who can't afford to take an internship, a traditional internship, if that means foregoing a job and an income to support themselves, their families, right? So now the commitment, instead of being a full semester or a year, now is 6 weeks, right? And if it's virtual, then you can also have a little bit more leeway in that. But I think part of the issue with career development is that for many, it's a non-starter because the opportunity cost is too high to really get involved into these experiences, right? So in things like micro internships, institution and industry partners can work together to find a common place, figure out which skills they can be honed in, how can it also relate back to the classroom and some of the curricular activities that students are required to know and be able to demonstrate, right? And lastly, I think a key element in all of this is really the career centers, right? For some institutions, a career center is really a luxury, but for other institutions, it's a core piece of achieving their mission, right? So I think that institutions that really do a good job at cementing the career center as a crucial element for success, not just for their students, but of the overall institution, kind of tend to have the leg up on preparing students for this new reality. And I think I'm based in DC, but really closer to University of Maryland and College Park. So I've had the opportunity to collaborate with them a little bit. And they have various initiatives out of their career center. And one of them is Intern for a Day, right? Similarly to micro internships, this program invites students to apply for an opportunity to receive information. It can be in a 60-minute interview with an employer or a one-day job shadow. It's not a huge commitment, but it's an online repository of industry partners, local folks that are willing to volunteer a day or an hour of their time. And students can go look at an Excel document and see what opportunities are there, how they align to their major, maybe their career choices. Maybe it's something that it's outside of quote unquote their traditional trajectory, but they're interested in. And now they have the opportunity to talk to somebody about what it means to get there, how they can get there in the current standard. And if it fits, and it's a very low risk, potentially high reward opportunity for them. But again, yeah, it takes flexibility and it takes those intentional partnerships with industry in your local areas.
Amanda, I'm happy to jump in. I think I would put a +1 to everything that Erick noted. I think that our institutions, the variety of institutions noted, have all been trying to crack this nut for quite some time, right? I was reminded recently, my first job, or my first professional full-time job, I did work as a student worker previously, but my first job at the community college system in California was as a job developer in 1999. So I've been wrestling with this question of, how are we preparing individuals for work? How are we connecting them to work? How are we aligning instructional programs to their employment. I worked at East LA College in their CalWorks program as the job developer. And so program of study alignment was not only nice to have, but also required for their continued funding. I start there because it's been too long now. I was reminded of how long I've been working on these problems, where we continue to wrestle with the same problem and we're not making sufficient progress, right? So we can strengthen our career centers, we can strengthen our alignment, we can try to set more tables, we can have better industry advisories, we can do all sorts of things, and we're not really solving the problem sufficiently for the numbers of individuals who need this support. And that makes me think also, or brings to mind also, then the reality that students are getting jobs with or without us. They are having to figure it out, whether we figure it out or not. And that's been our luxury. We can continue to wrestle through this, do the things that are familiar and necessary, right? It's not to say that these things aren't necessary. It is what we have at the moment. But when I think about what would I offer folks as they're thinking about how they engage in this problem going forward, many of these infrastructure pieces exist in some shape or form. Maybe the trailer at the back of the campus, but they exist in some way, shape, or form. What I would really encourage folks and would love to see is really thinking about how do we begin to re-articulate a new problem relative to this. If we assume that what we've been doing has been necessary but insufficient, and if we assume that individuals are getting jobs, right, whether we help them or not, because they have to, right? It's just a necessity. Then how do we begin to think about what our role is relative to those realities? And how do we really begin to think about how we lean more into two things, employment trajectory and professional networks, right? And so I have question marks in my mind on whether or not trying to build better relationships with employers is really a vehicle that is going to get us where we need to be. And in part just because I haven't seen it, right? It happens in really strong pockets there. And I'm not suggesting we shouldn't partner with employers, but as the sole vehicle, haven't seen it at the scale and at the scope and at the level of impact that we would like to have. What we have seen in places like USC, Harvard, other four-years is the value and benefit and impact of professional networks. And so how are we really thinking about an infrastructure that facilitates professional networks, given that our community colleges serve the majority of learners and thus the majority of workers in the workforce, right? And so how are we really thinking about infrastructures that support that, particularly given the ways in which technology is enabling us to connect more effectively? So before it was a scale issue of, well, we just can't connect, how do you do that, right, with limited resources at the colleges? There are so many more vehicles. So how are we starting to think about what is the problem we're trying to solve? Is the problem better industry partnerships, or is the problem really improved employment trajectories and stronger professional networks that individuals know how to access and navigate, right? So those would be my pluses to the, let's do the career centers, let's do these things, and or let's do them until we figure out if testing other vehicles actually gets us further, and then really evaluate whether or not these structures serve us in meaningful ways.
I think those are such excellent points from Dr. Montenegro, and then your plus, Marty, challenging us to think about ways to do things differently instead of stuck in the same format. And I wrote it down, re-articulate the problem. So I love that. Enrique, you have the next question.
I have the next question. In what ways can higher education institutions modify their curricula to better integrate digital literacy and technical skills, ensuring graduates are equipped for the modern workplace?
So
Marty,
yeah.
can you start us off?
I was going to say, since you took one for the team in the first
Yes,
go round,
yes.
I'll jump in. I have been wrestling with this as we think about at JFF, the role of AI and how institutions are responding to and or not engaging with and or not the advent of new and expanded technology. And so one of the things that this is prompting us to really think about is whether or not our current constructs of disciplines, courses, et cetera, is really going to serve us into the future. So as I think about the evolution of curriculum content, whether or not digital literacy, AI fluency, whatever that might look like, should be embedded across, or its own standalone, or how do we figure this out? I think it also calls into question the extent to which the ways we have constructed our curriculum content and disciplines is still the right vehicle as we look to the future. I was asked the question yesterday, should ethics, technology, ethics related to the use of AI and technology, et cetera, how do we build that capacity of individuals to do that? For example, should it be in a one-off course? And one of the things that it brought to mind was individuals have access to information in ways that most of us of the older generation couldn't even fathom when we were going to college. They can go on TikTok or Instagram or YouTube right now and access really robust information, sometimes really inaccurate, but sometimes really accurate information. And so what is our role if access to information is no longer what individuals need to come to us for? And so how are we thinking about content, but also how are we thinking about what our role is relative to their learning, and how they take in information and what that process looks like, and how they are consumers of information, recognizers of pattern, et cetera. I know we'll get into soft skills, but there is something in that I think we have to wrestle with and really ask ourselves, are we asking the right questions? And it almost prompts this question of, what is the profile of a college graduate going forward? Is it that I've taken that history class, or is that I understand how to do something with it? Question mark. And I say that as a longtime workforce professional, but also with multiple degrees in philosophy. So there is a false dichotomy that we need to start breaking down in this construct.
Yeah, I 1000% agree. And your points actually brought me back to something I was thinking about earlier today in pondering these questions. And I almost persuaded myself to walk away from this because it just sounded like we need to engage in some good old curriculum mapping, right? As one of like the efforts that we walk into, because career outcomes are often a afterthought when we look at curriculum mappings and learning outcomes, right? We're like, oh, out of the classroom folks, they got it. It's not something that we do here unless your major is super focused on a career that directly aligns. So I think we need to, as similar to what Marty said, we need to go back and really ask the right questions. Is it how we traditionally have done things? Is it working? And is it going to continue to work for where the job market's going, where the economy is going, where student needs are going, right? And then take a deeper dive and be brutally honest of, just like we ask ourselves, where do learning outcomes fall in place? Which courses are reinforcing them, and which part of the student trajectory is the right time for them to be exposed to certain experiences? We need to do the same thing with career outcomes and be really intentional in building those networks together. Because yeah, folks have a lot of access to information, but just because you have access to information doesn't know you are equipped or know how to put it into practice, right? And thinking of students like myself and many of my peers, I was a terrible student in undergrad when it came to career outcomes, right? I was a business major, but I was one of many who only found out about the Career Center and having to interview and getting job skills until it was almost too late. I was a senior, right? And so I knew that we had one in our college. I knew that I had heard of students going to it, but I didn't know to ask the right questions of, well, what are the benefits, right? How can I get involved? What are some things that I can gain from those things? So the hidden curriculum is very real still, right? And it's impacting first-gen, low-income students of color. And we need to be able to not only give students information, but eliminate the barriers for then placing action behind that information, right? It takes a lot of social capital, a lot of cultural capital to be able to know how to prepare yourself to be a successful student, and on top of that, a successful professional. So then thinking more about the classroom setting and practical applications, I think having flexibility in projects, assignments, and how learning is demonstrated, right, and building that into the curricula is hugely important. If we want students to integrate digital literacy, digital skills, technology, be able to use AI responsibly, then we need to be able to, or we have to provide inroads for students to be able to incorporate those things into how they demonstrate their learning, how they demonstrate their skills, and how they develop those skills, right? So instead of a final paper, we can have them do a podcast, open it up for them to give a TED Talk, allow them to digitally visualize their arguments, right? Whatever it might be, but then really start to put some of these technologies and some of these new methods into place, while also encouraging them to reflect and connect to real workforce outcomes and what they might want to be in their careers, right? I've said this to a colleague a few weeks ago, and I think it holds water today, where we tend to put a lot of focus on grading, right? And that's important. We need credits, we need to show GPA, but there's also equal importance in the experience and exposure that students can get out of the assignments that we assign to them, right? So we kind of flip that on its head a little bit and kind of marry it to experience in careers, experience assignments, and all that sort of jazz and bundle it together. I think we don't solve the problem, but we do a little bit better today than we were yesterday.
Can I throw in one comment before we jump to the next question? And Eric, you're just hitting on so many important points, and it made me think about, again, a conversation we were having recently, which is many students are going to come to us much more proficient in these technologies than their instructors. And I don't think we're fully talking about the impact of, I may be I'm not, but I may be an expert in philosophy, right? If I'm a philosophy professor and have been doing this, that does not necessarily mean I'm an expert in technology. And yet, if we talk about embedding technology or even the ethics related to the use of technologies or whatever content it might be, what we really have to wrestle with is if individuals have access to all of this information and have been using technologies in ways that many of us may not even play with, right? Then we also have to wrestle with how the role of faculty has to change, because we will no longer be the content experts. I know we talk about the sage on the stage, moving to the guide on the side, and we talk about it rhetorically because the construct has still remained the same by and large, right? The rules of the game have really stayed the same. However, we are going to be forced to really wrestle with this as the scale of a technology adoption moves, the pace of it moves. And it really begs the question of how are we going to attend to our faculty when there are these, as we approach these moments of, they will have access to way more information than we could possibly comprehend, and different perspectives on the content, right? Even for a philosophy course, if I am on the YouTube and or TikTok side of, Kant or Nietzsche or whomever, I'm going to come with opinions, thoughts, perspectives that, 20 years ago would not necessarily have been available to me unless I went somewhere, bought a book, did some stuff, right? Really were proactive. Right now, I could just flip through TikToks and watch 3-minute videos on all of this and get bombarded with information about it. I'm going to show up differently in class. And what you are bringing to me is also not necessarily going to register and or meet my needs if I am accessing this information in different ways. I'm overgeneralizing or oversimplifying, but I do think it's something we have to wrestle with because they are coming to us with much more information and much more access to information and a different comfort level, perhaps, in the technology space.
Well, thank you. I got the next question. On the topic of current and future trends in job markets, as automation and AI continue to reshape the job market, what steps should be taken to prepare current and future workforce for the emerging tech-centric roles, while also addressing the potential displacement of workers in routine tasks? How can higher education adapt?
Yeah, I'll take first stab at this, and I think my answer is going to stem from what Marty just shared, right? Because yeah, students are coming with us with so much information, and they're really the leaders in how to apply for AI. I'm still trying to learn how to use it and benefit from it, right? But my nieces and nephews are already experts in it, and they're about 10 to 14 years old. It's a little scary. But showing students how AI could be used to supplement their own learning is crucial, right? I think a lot of the conversation deals with the fear that AI is going to take over, or students are not going to learn because they're just going to rely on something thinking for them, right? But really, if it's a tool that, if a student is confused by a topic in class, or if they want to dive deeper into concepts, then they can use AI to assist in going that direction, right? If we become the routine of making sure that these tools are seen as partnership to education, not a replacement of, right, I think we can kind of mitigate some negative impacts. Many of us have Siri in our pocket already, right? And over the holidays, I witnessed my nieces and nephews just continue to use Siri all day long to provide answers to simple questions like, what's the weather like? But other more kind of specific questions like, I think my nephew asked, what's the fish that has the largest brain relative to its weight? And I think the answer was the dolphin. But my point is that we need to train students on how these resources can be a tool to elevate their learning, right? Take it as a next step and stop treating it as a threat, because the more resistance that we give it, the more that students are going to go to it, right? Anything that feels like it's on the fringes, it's kind of sexy and inviting to use, right? And if higher education doesn't take the charge on how to use these tools properly and leverage them correctly, then it's a missed opportunity, and another knowledge gap will be created for a generation. And the knowledge gap is not going to be for the most affluent students, right, who have access to even more technology, who have been exposed to it since they were super young, but it's going to be to students that have been had connection issues, bandwidth issues, right? The technology divide is still very real. So I think it has to be one of the imperatives of higher education. And on top of that, being able to help learners to understand what are the ethical issues, the privacy rights that come with AI, right? Because we don't do enough to help students understand those trade-offs. With increased accessibility to these tools also comes more threats, right? For example, viruses, people digging into your private information, oversharing, thinking that it's just an AI tool, but then what happens when it gets leaked? Potential misuse and ethical considerations. I think we all could stand from learning the do's and don'ts, honestly, like I said, myself included. But yeah, I think putting it into the right perspective and allowing students to wrestle with what does this mean in application. So for example, if I write a paper and I use AI, how do I cite it, right? How do I make sure that my professors know that I was assisted by this, rather than pretending that I wrote the thing when really 80% was AI, right? Having those negotiations and honest conversations with students and knowing that students are going to use it can open the door for a different type of discussion, one that's more solution oriented versus one that's kind of scared to really admit or acknowledge the elephants in the room, right? But really and I'll conclude by saying, by incorporating, embracing, and trying to be at the leading edge of AI and these issues, higher ed can really lead the conversation. I don't think that it can afford to be reactionary to AI and innovation, especially when it impacts the workforce, potential ROI for graduates, and so on, right? AI is still in development, but as higher education, we have the people, the research centers, the capacity, and many different applications that can kind of help steer it in the way that can help institutions, programs, graduates, and workers.
I think I was over here pulling up, I'm going to post in the chat a shameless plug for our Workforce Ready AI report out of JFF. So we have a new AI center, Future Workforce Center. And one of the things that I love about it that relates to this question, to build on what was being noted, is in this report, we look at the different ways in which AI is going to impact occupations. I'll give you the example of driverless vehicles, right? If I am a truck driver, right, or CDL, driverless vehicles is really going to disrupt my employment and experience because it is a highly important skill set for that occupation, being able to drive, heavy vehicles. And so then the state at which we need to, or the approach that we would need to take in order to take action to preserve employment, not see mass layoffs, et cetera, is really thinking about what's the evolution of that job description and or those skill sets for someone in a CDL, truck driving occupation. And so there is a need to augment, elevate, transform. Maybe it's more customer service, maybe it's more client management, like who knows what, maybe it's technology related. I need to be able to work on the technology for the driverless vehicles. But those are going to be some of the discussions that happen there. If I am a home health aide, right, and I am traveling to different sites to service people who need assistance at their place of residence, a driverless vehicle is also going to impact my occupation. It may create more access for individuals who don't currently drive or are uncomfortable driving to be able to enter that profession, perhaps. But because driving a vehicle is not the top skill I need or an important skill I need in order to be able to deliver healthcare service, right, it is going to have less of an impact on displacement for home health aid workers. As an example, just an illustration, right? It's actually going to augment and enhance and perhaps open up access to individuals to play a role in those occupations that may not have had access before. That's the ways in which I think this, or an example of which the complexity, diversity, nuanced nature of the impact of technology and automation on specific occupations. And the reason I point this out is because for education to start chasing what is going to be the trend or solution within occupations or industries is going to set us up to constantly be behind, right? And so how are we thinking about the ways in which we understand what individuals need in order to be able to have durability in the workforce? It means I need to be able to adapt when new information and or changes hit me. When they say it's no longer driving the truck, it is now taking care of the technology in the truck or whatever it might be, then I need to be able to adapt, learn, unlearn, relearn, and really be able to upskill in a moment in order to be viable for those. And or I need to be able to identify, if this is not what I want to be doing, where are my other options, right? And how do I build the skill to better be able to translate what I have done into a new occupation? And this goes back to the employment trajectory. People have a lot of agency. There's a lot of diversity and a lot of interplay across and between industries. And we don't fully embrace and or understand what that looks like and how we are preparing individuals to navigate a more fluid economy and frankly, a knowledge economy, where it is the human aspect of what we bring to the table that is really going to help us have durability and thrive. And our critical thinking and ability to recognize patterns and process new information and integrate new information. And so I think about, how do we understand the specifics? CDL drivers and home health aid workers may be impacted, but how do we also understand the bigger picture? How do we look at that bigger picture and how we are adapting instruction that is oriented around employment durability in a fast-paced changing knowledge economy?
Amazing, everything you guys have to say. And I'm a big open pedagogy fan. So as I'm listening to you guys think, I can't help but think this is a new era of being able to co-construct these things with our students that are coming in with this technology knowledge base and their employment knowledge base, and in co-constructing this new curriculum with them. So I've got notes like crazy. But I get to ask the next question, and Marty, you really teed us up well for it. How may job market change as a result of challenges and opportunities presented by the gig economy, sustainability-focused careers, and the trend towards remote work and digital nomadism? What may happen? How can higher education ensure both job security and work-life balance for their graduates?
I'm happy to jump in. Just building from what I said, I don't know. I think I would say I prefer the word durability, right, than security, because I don't know that we have security anymore. And I think this is going to be really hard for education professionals, unless you're adjunct, to really fully understand and embrace this idea of no job security, right? Because we in education, we have a history of, okay, we've landed it, we've gotten the tenure job, we're here forever, right? And that's great. And question mark, is that, you know, it's a huge privilege, because that is by and large not what we see, and not what we've seen nationally for quite some time in the labor market. And so if we can't identify with that reality of our students, that they are not, unless they go into education, they are typically not doing the same thing in perpetuity. How are we understanding the patterns of transition? How are we actively disrupting the patterns of transition? For example, if I'm a home health aide, what is my most likely next job, or what are the patterns we're seeing relative to that next job? Do I go into retail? Do I, you know, as we say, stackable credentials, do I go into CNA or LVN or RN? I don't know how often, I don't have the data right in front of me, but I would argue probably not as often as we would like to believe on our end. And so how are we understanding that, and how are we adapting curriculum and our services in order to really walk alongside individuals as they are navigating their employment trajectory? And this gets to gig economy, entrepreneurship, all of those pieces. You know, how are we understanding and facilitating agency through professional networks and other vehicles that actually help them better navigate, or more constructively navigate, an upward trajectory, even when they need to step back from the workforce, you know, and take breaks, because those employment gaps are a challenge, right, on the resumes, et cetera. There was one other thing I was going to say here, but I've forgotten, so I will hand it over.
I'll chat and hopefully it comes back to you. So I got hung up on the work-life balance part of the question, because I think this is a hard problem in beyond higher education to solve, right? If anyone here has the solution, please let me know, because I am struggling with that. But I don't think that higher education can tell employers to stop scheduling meetings for 5 p.m. on a Friday, or stop sending emails at 2 in the morning, right? But what we can do is teach skills for students that allow them to dictate, communicate what work-life balance means for them, right? Time management and communication, and all those soft skills that I hate are called soft skills, because they're the ones that translate regardless of what you do, right? So, but those skills equip graduates to be able to ask for assistance, advocate for themselves, and so on. But also higher education can learn from the past to ensure that we're protecting and moving towards an equitable future, right? The job market's always changing, but it's important that policy also changes to ensure equitable access, opportunity, and pay, right? The job market and economy overall is stratified, and it will be, and it'll continue to be stratified, right? There are high-paying jobs that require tons of credentials, right? And there's low-paying jobs that require less credentials or no credentials, right? We hear every day that higher education is broken, that the value of a college degree is diminishing, that students shouldn't pursue a 4-year degree because it's too expensive. But who is that message really affecting? Who is it really attracting, right? Who's the target? Over 90% of wealthy students are still going to go to college, regardless of what the conversation is. It's not a hard choice for them, right? It's almost an expectation. But for low-income students, for first-generation students, the cost of college is a deterrent. So when we hear that college isn't worth it, they're more likely than wealthy students to pursue short-term credentials. And if higher education isn't careful and doesn't approach this intentionally to ensure that those credentials translate to future opportunity, then that, you know, that the credits earned from those micro-credentials can be easily, right, missed opportunities. We need to ensure that they're stackable, that they lead to a degree, that on-the-job experience counts, and so on, right? We know what the right things to do here are. But we're moving towards a newly rebranded system of tracking students into different trajectories if we're not careful, and their life outcomes based on income and likely race will also be impacted, right? We'll be right back where we started. So to me, higher education responsibility is to ensure that those pathways to credentials are open to all and run efficiently. So students who pursue micro-credentials still make progress to a 4-year degree, right? I'm a huge believer that while college might not be for everyone, the opportunity to go to college and to get a degree should be available for everyone. Now, much of the conversation often focuses on traditional age college students, right? But while talking about lifelong learning, and we also have to ensure that pathways are accommodating and open to adult learners as well, right? Because in the new economy, there's no longer a traditional age, right? It has to be open for everybody. And I'll share a personal story. One of my brothers hated school. Like, he preferred to work since he was young, and he's very successful. He has his own business and has his own company, but the classroom was not his happy place. And that was fine for him. But we recently had a conversation that he would have liked to have the opportunity to earn a credential along the way, right? Something that could have been attained in 6 weeks, because a 4-year degree is too much of a commitment for him. Even a 2-year degree is too much of a commitment for him. But if he could have gotten something along the way that could have helped streamline his business, streamline his operations, earn a certificate, something that he can hang on the wall and continue to scale up, that to him has values, right? So when we develop these pathways and all these opportunities, we can't just do it with the 4-year degree in mind. We have to do it with adult learners, with micro-credentials, everything all together, or otherwise we're going to focus on one side of the equation and ignoring the potential inequities that causes, right? The pathways should lead to continuous opportunities for all and not be hidden off-ramps for folks that then it becomes impossible for them to come back on and continue to advance themselves. Because otherwise, the market's going to change again in 10, 15 years, and those folks that opted for those other credentials might be on the back end of that.
I mean, I would say this is what we have seen continuously, right? As long as the degree still exists and is still the key vehicle for those who have resources, we default to tracking, right? Whether, no matter how much we try to safeguard against it or not. And then we see that in the recessions, right? Where those are the individuals who are first to go often. And I'm not sure if we can jump to the chat, but I would argue as we're, looking, as some folks are commenting in the chat, I think we have this false dichotomy that is really coming to a head in a knowledge economy, right? Because there are technical skills. I'm going to learn Excel. When I was in high school, I learned Lotus 1, 2, 3, right? For those who remember way back when, right? So does that mean that I'm not proficient in Excel? And you have a foundational technical knowledge, you have ability to scaffold understanding, right? Still not proficient in Excel, but the point being that can adapt, right? People can learn new technical skills when we're talking about software changes and or, welding techniques or, automotive, et cetera. But the idea that pattern recognition, interpersonal relationship communication, critical thinking and integration of new information, those are also technical skills. Logic is a technical skill, right? Psychology and understanding motivation is a technical skill. And we talk about it as though these are soft skills or life, like whatever label we want to put on it. We are devaluing the competencies and technical ability to operate in these ways, which is what distinguishes those who get displaced, because I know how to do this one thing and I don't know how to adapt that, and or I don't know how to communicate my value and what I can provide you as an employee, with those who can, right? Those who can navigate social environments and social constructs in a way that facilitate their career progression. And so I think we have to wrestle with that. I also think we devalue the career tech ed side when we suggest that the sophistication of understanding floor plans, the ways in which different technologies work is not sophisticated, comprehensive knowledge, right? That folks are learning and understanding. And where we run into trouble is is our power, I'm going to say it that way, is our power as education institutions to issue a degree or not. Like, we are deciding what is seen as valuable and prestigious and what is not. And we run both ways, right? CTE versus transfer, but then soft skills versus technical. Like, we are constantly setting up these dualities that then diminish the value of the other in ways that are really no longer viable in a knowledge economy, when the human skill, right, and the human capacity to engage is so much more significant and needed for the long term.
Thank you. Wonderful answers. Thank you. We discussed the first category, which was the current and future trends of the job markets. Let's go to our final category, which is the evolving role of higher education in the job preparedness. And the question is, considering the rapid changes in the job market demands, how can higher education institutions balance the imparting of critical thinking, communication, leadership, activism, and problem solving with a need for technical proficiency and lifelong learning?
Gracias, Enrique. Take first stab at this. So we at the Pell Institute are currently trying to address this issue to an extent. So we're currently in a multi-year grant-funded study in partnership with Loyola University of Chicago and Career Launch to really try to explore and come up with a theory and practical framework for how we can deliver career preparation and really create an equitable career pathway for TRIO students. So how can we begin to deliver these tools for first-gen, low-income, and students with disabilities? How can we get these career skills to students who often lack the necessary capital to succeed in the workplace? What does an equitable career path even mean, right? So we're trying to answer all these questions, but at the center of it is really trying to ensure that TRIO students can be successful for the rest of their lives beyond the first job, right? Because when I think of lifelong learning, I always think of the other side of that coin, which is lifelong employability, right? I think that these two things go hand in hand because in a rapidly changing economy, we need people who can be open to learning new things in order to be employable long-term. And often the core skills remain the same, right? As I said earlier, communication, critical thinking, being able to work with diverse others, right? No matter where you go, employers need people that are good communicators and problem solvers. So to me, it's about teaching students how to apply these skills effectively within various innovations. And so we're going to launch a few case studies in the coming months with a few institutional partners, and then do some good old surveying and try to come up with a framework and model that we can test. But again, in thinking about direct classroom application, I think a promising way that we've heard is that folks are embracing the case study group work style of learning whenever possible. Most of these skills are critical thinking, communication, leadership, problem solving, all have to be put into practice when you try to solve real world problems, and even more so when you're trying to put in emerging technologies to work for you to solve those real world problems, right? So folks are starting to think, why not model those practices in the classroom? And we at Pell are trying to explore the best way to do this effectively with interventions and to truly benefit students from marginalized populations. But yeah, I think, again, it boils down to stepping out of your comfort zone, right? Ceding some of the learning power to students to really drive this, and putting in place a more creative type of learning environment that facilitates using innovative pathways, using innovative solutions to problems so that you can start students on the right pathway towards making these innovations and putting them to practice.
So good. So good. I want to challenge folks to think about if we're saying we want to help students prepare for lifelong learning, then I feel like we need to be along for the ride. And so in an environment, right, in a VUCA, is that what it is? VUCA environment, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, right? Given that we are in spaces in the workforce that none of us have necessarily navigated, if you are an older generation, part of what we have to wrestle with is, how we will not be able to prepare workers for that volatility, given that we don't have a sense of what is around the corner, which means that we have to be walking alongside people in real time, just like they are having to navigate this in real time. And that requires a different construct for us in terms of how we think about what our role is in a lifelong learning trajectory where we are walking alongside individuals. I've mentioned to folks before, in my perfect world, if we would have been ready for the pandemic, I'll put that in air quotes, right? As parents, maybe it's because I had a youngster at home during that time. As parents, we're trying to help their online educators or online students, right, in their work. We could have been providing support for them and documenting coaching proficiencies, child development proficiencies, right? All sorts of competencies as they were navigating that real life experience at that moment, right? It was an aha for me that people are learning and engaging, whether we are there or not. And the only difference is we are not transcripting it. And we can talk about credit for prior learning, but that's come, prove, validate, because we are not walking alongside people, because our business model, right, is such that when you come here, then we will pay attention to you. And when you are not here, we will not. And so how do we really think about what it means to have an assets-based approach, right? An equity assets-based approach. So for those individuals who are working, learning, raising families, what are the skills, competencies that they are building through that process, but also what is the enhancing and augmenting that we would provide? So when I'm frustrated that my, kiddo isn't progressing in their program, maybe I need to learn Google Classroom, right? How are you helping me navigate this in a way that I can show up productively, but also then what are the skills and tools I need that you will help me augment and enhance? I can Google it. I'll Google what I need to help them, but how are you augmenting and enhancing and walking alongside me as I'm navigating this journey? That's a different approach than the ways in which we currently construct our learning environments and our educational system. It's also wildly different than the types of solutions we have seen, or potentially wildly different than the types of solutions we've seen historically, where we are creating artificial environments that mirror the real world, right? Is it time to stop creating the artificial environments and just go to where people are in the real world and walk with them in this learning journey? How do we do it? How do we get there at scale? Question mark. But if we're not wrestling with these problems, we have no hope of getting there, right? So how do we begin to wrestle with shifting our frame of reference from what we have known to where we need to be in the future for our own durability?
Well, thank you. Well, yeah, that's very insightful. I think this is a very exciting time for educator and the student to be in the same journey together, try to more like co-create than just more like a one direction knowledge transmission. I got the last question. With the growing importance of online education platforms, what strategy can be implemented to ensure these digital learning environments provide an education that is both accessible and sustainable in preparing students for the modern workplace?
Go ahead, Erick.
So I'm trying to narrow down, also trying to be conscious of time. I'm trying to narrow down in my response to one thing. And this is going to be self-serving as well to my organization, but I keep coming back to mentoring, right? The Council for Opportunity in Education launched a fully virtual online career opportunities initiative, right? It's called the TRIO Career Development Program. And we specifically targeted TRIO programs in student support services and McNair programs because we identified that the folks that are in those programs often, again, lack the cultural capital, social capital, all these things to really explore and get the career development they need to be successful, right? And on top of that, they were not getting placed in internships. They're not getting placed in the best jobs. There's a lot of undermatching that happens with this population, right? So we built out an online experience for them to really develop what those career skills are, right? And to walk them through the process of creating a cover letter, having a resume, go and interview, right? And on top of that, be evaluated on the different NACE career readiness competencies by mentors, by everything. But the thing that brings that whole thing together and what made it truly work is the mentorship model. Again, because it was online and virtual, there's a lot of opportunities for students to get disengaged, right? To go do something else, to stop out at any point. Maybe one day they were really motivated and then the website crashed and they couldn't upload their assignment. So they said, what the heck, I tried, I'm on to the next thing, right? But those mentors that really understood who the students were, what their needs were, and had experience with the populations and could employ culturally responsive practices, right? And really relate to them on a one-on-one level, created these individualized plans for them. They took the time to understand what their goals were And we had 115 students and 6 mentors. So it was about roughly 20 students per mentor. And over the course of 2-3 months, they really dug their heels and helped these students develop some sort of skills, meet some of their goals, have daily check-ins. And it wasn't just about the opportunity they were engaged in, but it was also about their lives as students, right? Like, what are you going through? What are you being challenged with? Because they understood that for success for these students, we have to first address their survival instinct, right? It's hard to really get skills when you're trying to feed your family, when you haven't had good sleep in a week, when you're trying to get transportation to school or work and your car broke down, right? To understand that they're people first and then students, and on top of that, trying to get career education and mentoring them in all type of like a wraparound service type of opportunity was super impactful and meaningful. So I would say that mentorship and how you connect with those students in online environments is super, super crucial. And in case we have some TRIO folks in the room that might want to learn more about the initiative or see if they can send students, I'll drop a link to that in the chat.
I love it. I'm not far apart from where Erick is. I think one of the things, you know, in desire to be additive, one of the things I would encourage folks to think about, and that I'm constantly thinking about, is what magic do we expect these platforms to provide or produce? So as we are thinking about technology solutions, you know, is there really a difference between them? Question mark, right? Often it's minimal. And so as we are implementing new solutions, new technology solutions, what is it we think that will change about the student experience? And is that a meaningful change and improvement for them? Or is it creating additional burden? And so really thinking about what's that role of the technology, and what do we think it will do relative to the student experience? I think the other thing I would couple that with, though, is are we securing technology solutions that replicate our broken practices? And I say that lovingly. I say that very, very lovingly, right? But if we are just overlaying, right, your, 3-print copy paper, forms, for those who can remember those, sign here, press hard, has to go down 3 copies, carbon paper. If we're just overlaying that process with a new technology solution, right, we're not improving the process, right? We're not changing the process enough. We are just automating. And so really the question of, are we trying to create efficiencies or are we trying to create effectiveness? And just improving a process that no longer serves us is not helpful, right? So how are we really thinking about the role of technology in strengthening outcomes, not just automating, right, a workflow? And those are 2 different things, right? So I think we should, and then not everything will be student benefit. Some of it will be, institutional benefit to create more transparency around different data points. That's a different play, but understanding how does that then impact students, and then what's going to be the benefit to the students if we have those data points, or a clearer picture, transparency on what's happening to students through the process. So then how are you also building in the continuous improvement or review cycles into this work?
Okay, thank you so much for all the insightful, valuable information to us. So, well, first, I want to thank both Marty and Erick for your participation in the 11th Annual SL Symposium. And we should have like 2 minutes left, and that's like, I saw that there's 1 question in the Q&A. But if you have to go, I understand, but make sure you come back for the 3rd breakout session and the short evaluation meeting afterward. But let me ask the question, if for those who can stick around, then you can listen. The question is about employment trajectory. One question I have is about how to respond to employment letters with the middle ruts too often ripped out. It seems like there are entry-level jobs and some high-skill jobs, but a lot of the middle is gone. How do you work to develop that trajectory that are meaningful?
I'm happy to jump in first, since that's my favorite unexplored topic, employment trajectories. How do we even get that data is a big question that we're wrestling with right now. One of the things that I would encourage folks to think about is career mobility, right? It's not about placement in a job. They have to have a job, folks have to have a job, but it is about mobility. And the reason I use mobility is because the ways in which we have historically thought about placement and employment within higher education specifically is pathways, right? If you do all of this and then you get here and then you'll get a job and you're going to be on a pathway and we're going to ladder and we're going to stack and we're going to, do all these things. And then folks are like, well, let's talk lattices because maybe they move in different places. And we were very avant-garde with lattices. But in 20, 30 years, we're not talking about agency, right? We're not talking about inside-outside consulting. We're not talking about internal movement from one place to another. We're not talking about the different skill sets and revamping of job descriptions and creating of new occupations in really meaningful ways. And so while we can say that middle managers and those jobs are getting torn away, which I definitely agree with, I also think that we are in a tight labor market where individuals have a lot more agency at the moment and a lot more leverage. We're also seeing a new generation of workers who are like, no, I am going to work my wage. I'm going to act my wage and I'm going to do what I do. And you are not going to have access to me after hours, et cetera. Many folks will complain about it. I love it. I love it. The setting of boundaries, you are not going to take advantage, like my time is valuable and you are not going to take advantage of it. I'm not going to allow that. And normalizing and socializing that is phenomenal. It's scary. It's frustrating. I wish I would have done it at 25, not the generation I was born into. But how do we also understand the power, particularly for marginalized communities, in creating a culture within our employment ecosystem of agency, options, and seamless facilitation? If this isn't working for me, I can find something else, right? And I have the skills to navigate that. And I have the confidence and courage to do that, because how many of prior generations, and even I'm sure still, are afraid to move? They're afraid to transition because change is hard. So what is the comfort level we have to create with transitioning? So when those middle jobs aren't here, they're somewhere else, right? And I will find them in different places. The last thing I will say is, this just popped into my head. For those of you in the California system who may still be on, we had a terrible saying when I was on a college campus where, there is no Messiah in your own land. In order to get that promotion to dean, to VP, to whatever it might be, too often you had to leave your campus and go to a different campus, right? And so this idea that you need to transition is real, and we even experience it within our longevity system of higher education. However, we are also afraid to make those transitions quite often, right? Because we don't want to give up benefits, et cetera. So there's a coupling of the wealth conversation or the sustained wealth generation, generating with the need to understand and feel comfortable in the transitions.
That sets my answer up completely because we're on the same wavelength. I think the word trajectory can scare people because when you fall off that trajectory, now what, right? You're lost. You had your whole career planned out and now it's not what you had in mind. So what do you do? And the example I was going to put is exactly in academia. I have a ton of friends who went the faculty route. Some of them got tenure. Some of them did not get tenure or were not going to get tenure in the first institution. And they were freaking out, right? But guess what? Some of them got offers and said, if you come to us, we'll give you tenure. You met all the requirements. I don't know why they're not giving it to you there, but we value you here, right? So it's no longer a generation where you get your first job and you stick with it for the rest of your life and you retire at the same company that you worked at when you were 16, right? Now you're expected to, and somebody put in the chat, you have to go to grow. That's the kind way that people are putting it, but that's exactly what is expected. And that's what you have to do for yourself, right? When you feel unvalued, you feel, whether that be because of the culture, the pay, whatever your definition of value and feeling valued is and respected, you have to be willing to go and seek opportunities. For staff that I supervise, I encourage them to say to go and interview. If you're not doing one job interview a year, you're doing yourself a disservice. Doesn't mean that you're going to leave me and take the job, but I want you to go and better yourself, right? It doesn't mean that you're unhappy here, but you should be testing the waters for your career, for your advancement to ultimately get where you want to be. And the only way to test those skills and make sure that they're sharp is by putting them to practice, right? So go interview, test the waters, have fun, because yeah, it's no longer, you're not gonna be able to move up to be VP, president, CEO, whatever it is, by sticking in one job and hoping that you get recognized and that people see you for the rock star that you are. You have to put yourself in positions to have a spotlight shine on you. And oftentimes that means go somewhere else.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. So once again, thank you for the panelists for your participation in the symposium. Lots of great insights for us to digest and think about over this weekend, definitely. Don't forget, we have one more session. It will start at 2 p.m. So please take a quick break and we'll see you in the next session. Once again, thank you.